It's a heavy lift. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started with the City Council Finance Committee meeting for Thursday, April 17th, 2025. We have 3 items on the agenda today, and the first one is a discussion regarding financing options for public parking structures.
So we invited Mr. David Floyd to join us in this conversation. Councilmember Holman, I think, participated in the development of our downtown parking study. A firm, Kimberly Horn, engineered the study and provided a link on the actual agenda packet, just so we don't have to print more and more. But the parking study identified 3 parking structures. One of them across the street to the north of the courthouse on county-owned land. One of them at Peters and Gray on the city parking lot, and one of them on Campus Corner on another city parking lot. At the time, the conversation was had about when the time comes, the opportunity to develop a parking authority or to participate in an existing regional parking authority housed in Oklahoma City, Central Oklahoma Parking and Transit Authority, or COTPA. That particular agency was designed to develop and operate parking structures, and Embark also operates out of that agency. We started receiving phone calls from downtown property owners seeking parking solutions to professional office buildings that don't come with a parking lot. It's just a building in the middle of the block, in hopes that they could long-term lease from the city spaces in the Peters and Gray Street lot. It's about 151 spaces. We lease about 75 of them on an annual basis. And one particular building owner said, I'm looking for a 10-year lease for parking spaces. We have been in conversation with a developer interested in building housing, maybe as many as 800 housing units in downtown Norman, also requiring some parking strategy, some parking solution. So we pulled out the parking study and realized it may be time to initiate that conversation in earnest. I did call the folks at COTPA in Oklahoma City and said, hey, if we're looking to move forward with parking structures, what would you say if I said, why don't you come down and build us 3? And Mr. Jason Fairbrush, who administers that program, indicated they would love to. However, with the voter approval of the new Thunder Arena, they're going to expend all of their bonding capacity building a 3,500 stall parking structure next to the new Thunder Arena, and they don't have the bonding capacity to take on any additional projects.
So that wasn't part of the, it wasn't part of the, what voters approved? Funding for parking for the new arena?
I think they're designed to kind of stand alone financially. And with the pro forma they were looking at, apparently they figured COTPA could handle it and not necessarily need to lean into part of that $900 million voter approved project. We did see an RFP issued by Cleveland County to develop a parking structure on the lot just to the north of the courthouse. They received a proposal from a firm that had designed it and described how it would be financed. They also received a proposal from an entity proposing a hotel and a parking structure, and council saw that. I called the proposer up who just talked about building the structure and asked if that footprint that he had proposed, how transferable was that, and how transferable was that financing strategy. Turns out very transferable. The lot the city owns at Peters and Gray, almost the same dimensions as the one that the county owns on Comanche. And it started a series of conversations regarding what financing options might the council consider. And of course, we're always mindful to say, what can we do that will not leverage our general fund towards the development of these parking structures that were identified back in 2018. I met with Mr. David Floyd in his capacity providing bond counsel to the city of Norman, and his Rolodex is vast and includes people I had never met before. Met an interesting financial advisor who has an incredible portfolio related to parking garage development. And when I heard the individual describe bond market loves parking structures, I thought, boy, it sounds like this may be the time. So I did invite David Floyd to join us and share with you some of his thoughts and findings on how we might approach the parking structure.
Why does
idea.
the bond market love parking structures?
Fixed revenue.
Guaranteed.
If you structure it correctly, and the way that you want to do parking is you want to develop an asset for your municipality. So parking is one of the few hard infrastructure things that you can finance on a tax-exempt basis for public purposes that will also turn around and generate you a return. And you utilize it as its own self-perpetuating wheel. So once you have one going, you have a revenue source identified. You can leverage those revenues to create the next one and the next one and the next one. That's what Oklahoma City has done through COPTA, is whenever they need to expand their parking or embark or anything like that, they look at existing revenues that they have coming in from their system, and that's what drives their financing for the next one. So it never touches your budget. It never touches your general debt. It never impacts your sales tax. Those are traditionally the ways that you finance any sort of infrastructure, is ad valorem or sales tax. But when you have something like this that actually drives other value, it makes sense to spin it off and have it on its own. Now, the question always comes in, okay, how do you get the wheels started? And normally what we would do is we would look at existing parking revenues, meters, tickets, things like that. Norman currently doesn't generate enough to get started on debt service for a structure like this. And when we're looking at elevated parking structures, your cost right now is somewhere in the $20,000 to $25,000 a spot. So $150,000, $300 parking garage facility by itself, you're looking at several $1 million right out of the gate. So you start looking at, okay, what are other things that we can do that will feed revenues to the structure until the first one is up and going? Well, part of that is you look at long-term leases, and you can use those as a way to lock in your financing. You've already got guaranteed people that are going to purchase the slots. You can round up the rest of your taxing revenues and throw those in there as well. You can look at other grant funds. You can look at, there's money in the federal infrastructure package. If you start looking at tacking renewables and solar on, there are ways the municipalities can take rooftops, do power generation, and then receive a direct pay credit for the energy that's generated. So you start looking at the whole mix of what can we do to get this going. Another thing that I would say, at least to consider, at least for downtown, is you establish a downtown TIF and you use that as your backstop. So the way that it is set is that we've got everything else in the bag, and then we form a TIF and we pledge the TIF revenues if and when needed to support debt service. What that means is that you need $1 million debt service in 1 year and your parking revenues only generate $800,000. Okay, first $200,000 off the TIF goes to service the structure's debt. Rest of it flows through like it ordinarily would. And you get it to a point to where you never have to rely on those, but now it acts as a credit enhancement, so it's dropped your borrowing costs down. So once you get the first one going, then you don't have to worry about all the other pieces of the pot because you've started generating revenues. We've looked at this as something that the city of Norman could do, establish its own independent parking authority. You would transfer the parking lots that we're talking about and the rights to receive parking revenues to this authority. It would have its own board of trustees. It'd be a separate standalone legal entity, and it would either construct, operate, and maintain these facilities or bring in a private operator. There's plenty of private firms out there that operate parking garages. It's very automated, and they just take all of that from you. So in essence, you're holding the asset, but you don't have any of the liabilities. You haven't had to hire anybody to maintain these things. It's all on them. The other thing that you can look at, since you now have a revenue producing asset, is sell it. because private equity loves these things. And if you go to Tulsa and you fly out of the airport, there's a little logo over the parking garages. Tulsa Airport Authority doesn't own those. I believe it's Goldman Sachs that owns those. Free revenue coming in for them. So if you get to the point where you decide, we don't really want to be in the parking business anymore, you structure a sale of the asset and you take your cash and go do whatever else you need to do. Now, the problem with that is you lose a little bit of control over who uses it when and how and things like that, but it's a way to return some money to the city. So that was the start of the conversation. And then we started looking more at COPTA and more of a regional model, because if you can do it in Norman, that's fantastic, but the larger net you can cast, the more demand there's going to be, the more possibility for additional structures, the less that the city itself is just carrying the burden. And so this is where started the conversation with the county came in, because the county has also done studies on parking, and they're looking at something very similar to this. So the conversation with them was, well, we do a trust that Norman and Moore play a role in. We finance it on our books through the county trust. There's an interlocal agreement or a use agreement with the city, where the city takes either maintenance and operations, or just operations, or reserved a certain amount of spots, and the rest of them go up for public auction for downtown people to buy, or they're metered or something like that. You get 2 or 3 going that way with the county's books behind it. Then you look at Moore. Okay, well, at some point you're going to run out of surface parking space in Moore. You're going to want to expand that into other forms of retail, housing, things like that. The only choice for parking is you go up. So the thought now is, if we could do this in a way that it benefits the entirety of the county, we spread the liability amongst other municipalities and governmental entities, so it's not just on Norman. We can still address Norman's parking needs and do it in a way that doesn't impact the budget and is revenue neutral for the city. Then that would be a way to kind of solve this parking problem that we have.
Our conversations with downtown businesses who recognize the asset they own, that building doesn't come with any parking asset. 75 annual leases, and we're in conversation talking about what is the future of the Vista building. If the county, once the new sheriff's office is built out on Flood, the sheriff will leave a couple of floors in Vista. It sounds like the state of Oklahoma is interested in expanding their access in the building. They would love to have more parking spots available. We think we could long-term lease 200 parking spots, build maybe 400 parking spots, and net add additional parking in downtown. And I think about, times Music Fest and game day, etc. We could really take full advantage of some vertical parking. Each one of the parking structures identified in the study actually has different attributes that may lend each one of them to different outside funding sources like grants. The parking structure envisioned next to the depot with a hotel in front of it, based on its location, qualify for ACOG funding for park and ride onto the Amtrak system or onto the future RTA system. I think it scores well and probably has a favorable shot at receiving some outside funding. It just reduces overall financing costs. One component that would be an element in the financing package, if we're going to park downtown more like Oklahoma City, one thing we do recognize is you pay to park on the street and you pay to park in the structures in downtown OKC. In conversations with a couple of building owners, we recognize that to approach downtown businesses and say, how about we begin to pay for parking today and we'll build you a parking structure in the future, wink, wink. Probably not an easy sell. Conversely, if we build a parking structure, are we on board with paying to park in the downtown? And the response I received from a couple of property owners was, go build that parking structure. And I think that's a much easier rollout when you have vertical construction happening. the realization that we're going to pay to park downtown because we need more parking, and we don't want to gobble up all of that beachfront property just with flat parking lots. So we're not asking anybody to approve financing this conversation to refer us back to that parking study. There's actually another parking structure that was not conceived in 2018, and that would be the opportunity to develop a parking structure out next to the Life Hack. And we know we consume an awful lot of Embassy Suites parking lot. We initiated a conversation with the folks at Embassy Suites and said, we know, our guests do consume your surface parking. What do you think about us maybe building a vertical parking structure on your land, and you're guaranteed your exact number of parking spaces today plus a handful? And Embassy Suites said, we're already charging to park. We have models of this exact same concept in multiple Embassy Suites across the country. And yes, we'd like to explore it. So we see these three plus potentially a fourth. And under this concept, it won't require like a Norman Forward 2 allocation to provide additional parking to the Young Family Athletic Center. So,
Councilmember Graham?
I was interested in the infrastructure bill. Good to know about the green garage. That's what I'm going to call it. Would love to explore it. And then, is there any money around housing and parking structures?
Specifically for housing?
Or, incentivizing housing, like the park and ride situation that ACOG has. I remember I was
housing adjacent.
Yeah, I was in a transportation meeting in 2023 at the depot. It was, we were questioned what Norman was doing for housing, which I thought was interesting because it was talking about expanding rail. So I was curious if you had heard anything around housing and parking solutions and making more housing available.
So from what I've seen so far, there's nothing specific to parking and housing, except that if you are building additional if you're building additional housing, those cars have to go somewhere. And so that is looked on as a source of future revenues. If the developer is going to make some agreement that, okay, I'm gonna build this apartment and everybody's that buys in gets 2 spots that comes along with it, that's just another long-term source of revenue that helps drive down your interest and your borrowing costs. And it's a demonstration of demand going forward.
And Councilmember Grant, I think what we will investigate, and we put it under the banner of transit-oriented development. I think that's the approach. We'll start putting in those keywords in our searches, and that's great for air quality. There's a lot of benefits that go along with it, and it might provide end-around grant assistance in that pursuit.
On that same note, in the parking study and in previous discussions about parking structures, council and myself, previous councils have been pretty adamant about making sure that they are street active. So leasable commercial space on the ground floor. So it's not a block that's just like a dead, concrete wall or whatever, which Oklahoma City has a couple that are just like the entire block is just a dead zone. So we wanted to make sure that they were active, street level, that they complemented the historic character of where downtown or Campus Corner. One by the YFAC, obviously there's not a historical character for it to look like, but it could look like the YFAC, I guess. And I think it could be pretty interesting if that one had an active street and there were small shops and stuff that were part of that, but another discussion. But I think, the opportunity for potential housing to be mixed, a structure that's mixed use, or if it just has commercial space on the ground floor and it's all parking above. But you're saying leasable space, either for housing or for commercial, could be a benefit.
It could be. Now, when you start getting into leasable space, that changes the calculation a little bit on the tax exemption as far as how that's going to be used. But structurally, everything's the same. You've got a tenant paying for a space, either for parking, retail, or housing.
And they're already conceived to be fire sprinkled, so there's really not added cost in construction other than, extruded glass and aluminum out there on the storefront.
Councilor Hinkle.
I agree. I mean, this plan to create density and to bring more parking and more, just a lot of the things we've been talking about in downtown Norman, I think this is great. I really like the opportunity for us to pay as we go or not take on as much bond debt to create this infrastructure to where we're servicing it like other projects that we've kind of done quickly. So I think we're on the right track with this. I would like to see more and really want to dive into exactly how that bond structure is going to go so that we can see what that will look like.
And I think the Finance Committee is the perfect venue for updates as we take steps into the development of that entity that would be issuing the debt and responsible for debt service. We did share with Mr. Floyd the parking fee schedule that Oklahoma City currently employs that appears to be adequate for them to make all the debt service on all of their parking infrastructure in downtown. So what staff would propose is Finance Committee will meet again in about 4 weeks. Our ability to provide some documentation for your initial review wouldn't be an action item for a while, but we'll bring to you, we'll peel back a few more layers of that onion, bring you that next step. And as long as we continue to stay in lockstep with council's consensus, be able to put together a timetable for you as to when action items would be conceived. Fortunately, the firm that drew the YFAC has current parking structures that they have engineered and designed under construction right now. They're getting really good, accurate, regional cost activity. So hopefully, we can keep that number really, really, really tight with what the market would actually charge us to build such a thing.
I'd also like to look at the order of which they're built. Because, downtown Norman definitely needs one, but it seems like YFAC is such a captive audience that if we're looking at future projects based off of projects that perform now, then yes, get the downtown one in place, do the YFAC one next because it will be used all the time.
Immediately.
And then it gives us the ability to do the last 3, 4, however many, probably with a little less financial burden.
Okay, so a couple things. Campus Corner would have some apprehension just because of maybe we need an update on the usage of our Asp Street parking lot, but apprehension about building a parking garage on Campus Corner, even though people are always talking about the lack of parking, but we build a parking lot there 1 block to the north of where everything's at, and it's sparsely used a lot of the time, and it's got 88 spots or something. So maybe it's changed since the last time we talked about that, but in my observation, it's still being sparsely used. But I would agree, like YFAC is clearly a big, there's a demand there. Downtown, there seems to be, I know the Gray Street parking lot is pretty full most of the time, and all the parking spots on Main Street are, especially in the evening, are all taken. So with the county garage, so with a hotel attached to it, and based off of the drawings we've seen of it, I can't recall how many spaces they were anticipating, but it seemed that the hotel may be using most of it. And then it has stores on the bottom and stuff.
Yeah, the hotel was 509 rooms. They indicated that they will require a reservation of probably 75 spaces. The county is figuring they would need 100 for future courthouse and just county government needs. And they're describing building up in increments of 150 spaces. So they're looking either 350 or 450 spaces that would not eclipse the top of the hotel. So it would still look like it fits, but I think there could be as many as 200 parking spaces available to the public for special events, for park and ride and that type of activity.
And so, I mean, in the evening, when the county offices are all closed, and that's when it seems to be the busiest in my experience down here is in the evening, as far as finding parking. And so their garage, and we used to have, our conversation used to be about a joint, parking authority. I guess that's maybe not what we're gonna do.
It's still absolutely viable, and the thought of, guaranteed revenue with a hotel developed on site. That same architectural firm, FSB, is drawing the hotel and that parking garage. They've given us schematics for the one at the LifeHack. They've given us some schematics for the one on Peters and Gray. There could be a lot of synergy that comes along with it. So it's absolutely council's call on what the makeup of that entity is. Part of me loves the greater distance from another entity taking on debt. You take on all that debt, and I've got more separation from our general fund, and that makes me happy. So
Yeah, I was just thinking of a scenario where there could be county parking garage and a city parking garage, and it's $2 to park here and it's $1.50 to park there, whatever. Like, I don't know if they're not coordinated, and maybe they don't have to be, I don't know, but,
Get $3 and build a sky bridge between.
yeah. Councilor Grant?
2 questions. One with Campus Corner, do we have leases there currently?
I don't believe any of the city parking has long-term tenants. It's just pop in and pay if you find space.
Interesting.
Several
mean, they're-
businesses have asked about it.
Like if they can lease it?
If
I
they
mean-
could lease a space, where space is.
I think the answer would be yes. Well, I would say maybe we should do some outreach on that particular lot and see if there are people that are aware that they can rent long-term leases.
And honestly, if council would be interested in considering doing some long-term leases on those 88 spaces, that's just not a conversation or direction staff had received previously. I think it would be a wonderful thing. We would love to do that outreach. We'd probably ask Mrs. Sarah Kaplan to start making contact and just say, hey, is there interest in long-term leases? That makes bond council's job that much easier. If we can lease out 100 and we were planning on building maybe 300, that makes the math that much easier.
And then the second question revolves around a potential partnership with the county and TIF discussions for downtown. One would assume that if we were to use up to 200,000, wouldn't want to see all of the downtown TIF allocated towards that. There are other things we've been asked.
Infrastructure specific, absolutely.
Alleys specifically, but on street parking on the other side of Porter, that's something that's come out. But I could see 200,000-ish. So I would assume the county would be for supporting a TIF in downtown if a parking garage was
and
part of it.
Council's conversation about that east side downtown TIF, the original line for the current Center City TIF is the railroad tracks. And it's active on the west side of the railroad tracks, but we are now seeing that interest to activate east of the tracks, and the ability to get that TIF established before a hotel breaks ground and before 800 other housing units begin to form up would provide you with the greatest bang for that infrastructure dollar. The goal being TIF dollars would be available. Hey, bond market, if things don't go the way we plan, we can still make debt service no problem. And the plan is you don't ever have to touch a TIF dollar to make the parking structure pencil out. That'd be the goal. So it would save all those TIF dollars for other infrastructure investments.
Okay.
And there really isn't another way what we have with our downtown alleys, it's either general fund or tax increment financing. There isn't another source to redo our old alleys.
And the Campus Corner garage location is still next to the Noun
Yes,
Presbyterian.
yep, to the east.
And the idea being Presbyterian Church would still have the same number of spaces they have on the surface.
Oh,
And we
absolutely.
would build up. And then we would still have our parking lot on ASP too, so, okay. Any other comment about that?
Well, Mr. Floyd, we'll
think we're
plan
all in
on
support of
an
that.
update about 4 weeks from today, bring you what those trust documents would look like for the entity that would issue the debt for your consideration, and bring you some schematics with some either active street fronts and our conversations with our friends from Mixtape One of those artists happened to be the engineer who engineered the Scissortail Bridge. And I asked him about, so tell me, what would an artist think of a parking structure with an active street front? What would that look like? And he said, why wouldn't you make the rooftop active instead where you have a view? And I thought, whew,
Well, not instead. Definitely not instead, because
But maybe
don't
both.
want a dead street, because then nobody's going to be interested to go to the top. And in the case of the downtown, the murals that we have on that lot and them being preserved is something I've had people reach out about. If we're going to build a parking garage, that those were incorporated into that structure somehow. So, okay. Any other comments? Mayor? Jody?
appreciate you, council. Thank you, Mr. Floyd.
Happy to help.
You wanna go on the table?
Distracted now.
All right. Yes, thank you very much, David. And the next item on the agenda is a discussion regarding a potential parking tax fee for public parking structures. And we have someone.
So I know this was
It says
Councilmember
Nash PDF.
Nash's.
I was like,
Yes.
Councilman Nash?
All right. Well, so as you guys may recall, it's been a while. Councilmember Hinkle this is before your time, June 17th, 2024. Sent out an email discussing the possibility of the city levying a tax on commercial parking spaces. And at the time, the main motivator for this was the thought of the arena area coming into play with the 100% sales tax diversion. How can we claw back a little bit? Well, if they're going to be putting in a parking garage, then we could levy a special tax on parking garages or on short-term parking, commercial parking spaces. And so I did some research on other cities, if any other cities were doing this, and it turns out to be a very common practice. So for example, Chicago, now I'll skip to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, 37.5% and 22.5% on the gross receipts and parking transactions. Now, a lot of these cities, they've got taxes that are levied on both short-term and long-term. Things are going to get hairy with the language on that. So like New York City's got 18.375% on parking and garaging. There's only one state that's got a statewide tax on parking, on commercial parking, and that's Illinois, which is 6% on hourly, 9% on monthly and annual parking, which is on top of that first city I was about to mention, Chicago. So this is a place where, like Chicago, you're kind of double taxed on the parking spot. They charge 22% on weekdays, 20% on weekends, 20% for valet. And so, it's not an uncommon practice. I had emailed Jacob Rosecrans, asked if there's any kind of state law prohibiting a municipality from levying such a tax. And he wasn't able to point to anything specific. He had his assistant do some digging for me. And I've got I think I attached that email with the email I sent out in June. But long story short, there's nothing in the books that prohibits a municipality from levying these kinds of taxes on parking spaces. And I see this as kind of now that we've taken away the parking minimums, if we look long-term into the future, parking garages are going to become more and more important, especially if we're trying to build walkable areas, because you can't have a dense walkable space when you've got acres and acres of parking lots surrounding it, plus parking lots. So it's dead space. We can condense it, and the only way to really condense it is parking garage, and those parking garages are going to have some kind of fee on top of it. And right now, there's not a whole lot of paid parking in Norman. I think OU's got the lion's share. Going forward, as it becomes more common and we get more parking garages, it'll be more difficult to, I think, sell this to the public, because as it stands right now, most of the residents, I don't think, ever really think about paid parking. They don't. I mean, we know where to go and park, more or less. So the parking garages that do exist are mainly used by students or visitors. As time goes on, that might change a little bit, but being that this is a new tax, it'll have to go in front of the people, I believe. And so this is sort of the best time, I think, that would have the easiest time to sell it to the public, because it more or less doesn't affect most residents here. And now there are some exemptions to the parking taxes. So I looked at Illinois. They've got in their administrative code a list of exemptions, which I went and borrowed some ideas for how they're handling the language on exempting various things. So like residential off-street parking for home apartment tenants or condominium occupants should be exempted. I don't think this should be applied to parking spaces that are granted with a long-term lease. And then parking by hospital employees, and a parking space that's owned and operated by a public, private, or non-public hospital. That could even be extended to other parking spaces in these public parking areas that are used by employees of the various businesses. Now, I'm not sure if it will be able to be applied to OU. I don't know if their tax exemption is just blankets every kind of tax that can be imagined, or if it's a very specific set of taxes. But that would definitely be kind of something worth looking into. And if we're looking at potentially using parking structures and going to the bond market, then kind of borrowing a chapter from the OTA, the Turnpike Authority's playbook, and opening up kind of a cross-pledging so that the taxes levied on parking within the city can also be used to pay back debt service on any kind of parking structure would, I think, give us a stronger position to be able to finance parking structures in the future. I think that's really the big points. Now, game days. Game days, either an exemption or maybe an exemption to entities that be sort of disregarded, or people that are not actually like engaging in the business of commercial parking. So anybody who's not doing it for more than like 10 days out of the year. So people that are charging to let people park in their yards. We don't want to be messing with that. That's going to get real hairy real fast. And yeah, I think those are all the big points. Councilmember Grant?
Yeah, I like the idea of this. You answered part of my question, which was what will we spend the revenue on? Debt service for the structure makes a lot of sense. I saw in your email that you said it could go towards homelessness.
That is a point of discussion. Just doing a quick napkin calculation based on our parking study and a whole bunch of estimates that I don't remember because it was so long ago. About 300,000 a year. That could offset the cost that goes into there. Now, if we create a parking authority, that's another area where I'm not sure of if that parking, well, first off, that parking authority can receive taxes, but then if that parking, then if we were to use it for any kind of municipal purposes, would that parking authority have to grant us? These are all parts of the weeds that I think our staff would have to look into, depending on which direction we wanted to go.
So a couple thoughts as to how revenue streams could be bifurcated, and a thought that if it's a tax, that tax question versus if we had a surcharge on parking, would that might be viewed not as a tax? Might it provide you with more flexibility in terms of the discretionary value of how you assigned your surcharge? So that it may honestly just come down to the magic in the language. to say, if it's a tax, you may have to get really, really specific on what those tax dollars could be spent on versus a surcharge that the voters don't approve. The council sets the fees and sets the surcharge, and then council determines what the surcharges could be used to support. So I think the magic will come down to
And if it goes
how it's
into
built.
in front of the people as a tax question on the ballot, then we'd have to designate a use for it. So if our concept was either homeless services or anything else, that would have to be part of that language, correct?
That's my guess.
And so then if the people approved it, then then the people have spoken, and that would be a very hard dedicated funding source.
I'd say the other part of, I guess I had three questions. I guess OML City Legal would be a great way to investigate the appetite. Well, I would say across other cities, because yeah, you could do this, but then there's the ramifications across the state. And then I would think Rick's office would figure out the surcharge tax. How should this be written? Yeah. So I would like to ask OML for their thoughts on this.
Yep, and we can do that homework and bring you back options and alternatives for the committee to consider before something rolls forward to council for action.
Councilman Hinkle?
So coming from a person who's had a driveway his whole life, what, in the big cities, like what is the time frame that designates short-term and long-term? Did you see any like averages or?
A lot of the language differentiators that I saw was hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. And I'd be inclined to just have this, because we don't have we don't have a lot of yearly parking that I'm aware of. We don't have an airport, so we don't have a lot of long-term parking. And if we did, I'd kind of see it sort of in the same light as hotel motel tax versus that don't apply to long-term rentals and long-term leases.
30 days.
Well, and that would be a question to bring up with OU as more of Westheimer comes online and they start to see more commercial things go in that direction.
Redoing the terminal potentially.
I also, like the opportunity of what the proceeds could go for. I mean, I think that there's a lot that could be generated here. There's a lot of possibility of what that could do. My question with the surcharge or the tax, and I'm glad that Mr. Floyd is still here. But if we you had mentioned in the building of these parking structures how there was tax exemption in the financing to some aspect. If we're actively charging a tax on this, does that interfere with that tax exemption in any way?
Well, it's your revenue stream as a governmental body. If it was a private entity doing it, then, let me rephrase it. If it's a private entity, or if you have long-term leases that have a disproportionate private impact, then there are some tests you have to look at.
Okay.
But it would just come down to how exactly is the thing being utilized.
So our ability to develop the fee structure and avoid triggering a taxable issuance to build, that might be the rule we choose to follow. Because obviously the lower your interest rates are, the quicker that asset gets paid for and positive cash flow begins.
May I ask a question? When this tax is being assessed, is it like a property tax where you have a parking lot, therefore we are taxing each individual slot at a number, or is it you've got a commercial lot and we're treating this as a sales tax that gets tagged on to whatever the top is? How is it being assessed?
They could be on the gross receipts, not on the lot or not.
Okay, so if I'm operating a commercial lot, then in addition to the $5 an hour, you're gonna charge, it's a surcharge tax. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so like if it's a failed parking space that never gets any business, then sure, they're not, they don't have additional overhead on top of that. But another kind of thought, like, now, how much benefit or how much it would actually be able to generate kind of limits its value in this respect, but like as a mechanism to assist developers to build parking garages in a way to kind of incentivize, sort of in the same vein as a TIF, the taxes that were collected, that would be collected on the parking spaces could be themselves kind of diverted to help with the construction or the various fees to build it in the first place. So it might provide an alternative mechanism versus just straight sales tax or property tax. Although I think that would be kind of veering off from the Local Development Act and sort of creating our own incentive program, but just a thought.
A TIF can capture any, all, or limited numbers of legally available taxes underneath it. So you can do just sales, you can do just ad valorem, you can do a mix of both. You can do just sales and lodging. So if this is legal, I have no idea if it is. But if it is, then yes, you could do a TIF that is just parking tax revenues from this area get diverted through the same TIF formula, and you exclude sales, use, and ad valorem.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Higbee.
Daryl said something that made me want to ask this question, but if we have developers that want to build parking garages as part of developments and we identify that it's of benefit to the city and we have a new parking entity, can we issue conduit bonds through that entity to help some of those? I mean, if it's revenue based anyway, can the city help? If we're trying to spur that vertical parking and not take up land space and create density, then it seems like we could incentivize those private entities through a conduit bond to issued through our
And I would
parking
think,
authority.
if I'm depending on the nature of the development, I do. Residential, mixed use, I love the downtown environment. I'm probably not in it with the parking structure as my end goal for that kind of an asset.
Sure.
Different types of entities love that asset. It's a kind of a low maintenance, low effort to get this constant revenue stream. It is, I think, possible if a developer comes forth and says, here's what I want to build, and I know I need to provide X parking, to say, could we consider, if this entity is kind of a self-fulfilling exercise in financing parking structures, to say if you assigned that much real estate into this agency, it becomes the agency's asset. You get the benefit of however many spaces you need, and we can argue the public benefit of spaces in excess of what your actual development cost. I think we could get there. There's probably a couple different ways to slice the parking function separate from the development of.
As we have more limited acreage for commercial development, and we look at sites like Embassy Suites that have a lot of turnover but a huge parking lot, that may incentivize further development to come here quicker if one of those problems are easily solved. And if it's all the same, if it's paying for itself anyway, then maybe that's something we can use as incentive for that.
Yeah, let's go promote.
Yeah.
Honestly, the conversations that have happened as a result of council's action to eliminate parking minimums, that word is growing. And we actually had developers at the International Convention Center, International Shopping Center convention in Dallas say, oh, you guys don't have parking minimums. You are correct. You tell us how many parking spaces you need. So word's starting to get out there that we do it a little different in Norman, and it seems to be appealing. And I think that's another
If
great
you got
add.
20 acres and you're doing multifamily on it, you can go vertical and get more units and create a parking structure that takes more, or takes less land use. That seems like a easy way to incentivize. Anyway, that's my piece on that.
Love it.
Yeah, please.
Question in that is, I understand we have an authority to be able to fee ourselves or take anything that we own. What gives us the authority to put a fee on OU or any other private property?
Off the top of my head, don't know.
It'd be an interesting question. Obviously to tax in any sense, our own self, piece of cake.
We'll return with definite answers.
Yeah, that's a good question. My assumption would be that we couldn't do it to OU, or the county on theirs.
I
Councilmember Byrd.
thought on that parking authority, that could be many partners a part of it, and then their board of trustees would be representatives from whoever. So like say 2 from the city, 2 from the county, maybe 2 from OU.
Maybe somebody from Moore, maybe somebody from.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see more details about the Illinois state law and like how does that apply to the University of Illinois or Northwestern University or whatever.
And how do communities benefit from,
Yeah.
is it just state revenue? Cause we don't need them
Right,
taking
we
more money out of our pocket.
Well, my
But,
question is the cities that we're looking at, and where a lot of the studies probably make a lot of sense, have a lot more public transport and density and things like that make a lot more sense than maybe Norman does. As we look for things like long-term parking, I mean, you may have somebody who wants to spend the whole week on Main Street, but there's not a hotel on Main Street that you would stay there yet, or.
Yeah.
So in Illinois, on their exemptions, parking in a parking area or garage operated by the federal government or its instrumentalities that has been issued an active tax exemption by the department under Section 1G of the retailer's occupation tax. You do the
Retailers.
same for
occupation.
state and state university. However, this is the Illinois state law. It'd be interesting to see what the Chicago
Has the-
does, if they have to address that, or if there's, but the state, Illinois state, is the tax exemption question. Whether or not the tax exemptions that they have blanket everything, like, and very well, I know they got, like, OU's got sales tax exemption, correct? Yeah.
What I understand.
That I don't know.
Businesses on campus do pay. So I've had this question asked, the commercial businesses on the first floor at Eddington Hall, from what I understand, do pay sales tax.
And concessionaires in the stadium are
So
supposed to be
Former
collecting it.
president or former mayor of Langston, when I would see her at ACOG, she was really concerned about, they're a real small town, that Langston University wasn't paying any sales tax and commercial businesses were locating on the campus in the town. So, yeah, I think we do.
I believe we do.
That's a great, it's a really good idea for us to think about, I think, and I look forward to getting some more info.
And we may want to just grab the
Some more
moniker that the
research
state
about that.
of Illinois uses to
Yeah.
kind of define
How to do it.
what it is. That we have, when we talk about hotel bed tax, it is transient occupancy tax is what it's known by nationwide. So that's, I think, very telling as to,
Every option's worth exploring. I think.
Absolutely.
So,
Timing on these coming in.
Yeah,
yeah, we're on it.
I did want to mention too, the thing about parking structures, that McAllister, Oklahoma is a town of 18,000 people and they have 2 parking structures in their downtown.
We cannot be.
They also have a
outdone.
15-story hotel. It's an old historic hotel.
Wow.
It's really cool.
Are those parking structures full every day?
And they're like 2 stories.
Okay.
Well, I think but it's like, how'd they do that? When did they do that and why? And I think too, Norman ranks 7th nationally in least densest cities in the United States because of our large city limit size. And I don't know if that's something that any potential people looking to build something in Norman, if they look at that and they think, oh, Norman's not dense enough to justify that. But if you looked at just the urban footprint of Norman, the density goes way up. And so I don't know if that's a factor, and if that's something we need to make sure people are, we have 200 square miles, that's why we look like we're not very dense. But
Yeah, we
the
need
urban
to
part of our city is pretty dense.
shape that narrative, absolutely.
Okay. Anything else on that topic?
We are on it.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, David. Again, appreciate it.
Item number 3 is a discussion regarding monthly revenue and expenditure reports.
As Mr. Francisco continues to mend, We are fortunate that Mrs. Kim Kaufman is here to walk us through the numbers for last month.
I would just draw your attention to sales tax for April. There were 3.5% below last April, and then 1.3% below year-to-date revenues compared to last year. And because our sales tax budget was set 2% higher than last year's receipts, we're also 3% below budget target at this point, so.
Like we described in our budget study session, this is what we're seeing metro-wide, statewide. Our belt tightening exercises are almost identical to the belt tightening exercises we're seeing from our neighboring agencies. Some of our neighbors are a little more aggressive in next year's revenue projections. We are being more conservative on next year's revenue projections until we see a sign that something is turning the corner. Our population continues to grow, student population continues to grow. So we don't really have an answer as to why. Why are we spending differently or why are we spending less? We have a lot of discussions over the last couple years about inflation, and if I need to buy 12 eggs and they cost more, sales tax goes up. Prices have flattened out. Getting to lower inflation does not describe why everybody in central Oklahoma is receiving less sales tax revenue at the city level. So all of our department directors and our budget managers, everybody's got a different set of news feeds they look at every morning on their computer. And everybody's on high alert looking for signs and information as to why we think this is the current state. We will continue to remain conservative. Our long-term goal based on prior council action is to stay far enough ahead of the current situation that we don't want to be in the layoff scenario. I think when agencies find themselves in a layoff scenario, they may not have been looking far enough down the road to take corrective action in their budget to avoid those layoffs. And we know that the lion's share of our budgets are the actual people that provide the service. When agencies find themselves with the need to, sorry, we're gonna have to reduce the workforce, that means the level of service your community is going to experience will be reduced, and we're not willing to go there, darn it. We're willing to make tougher decisions and be more strategic in how we go about the delivery of service and hiring and backfilling vacancies, et cetera. So we pride ourselves on being far enough ahead and accurate enough in our crystal ball to avoid what I think we'll probably see from some agencies in the next year, unless things change. You'll hear more stories about some agencies with layoffs, but we don't intend to be one of those.
Well, I think it is, when you look at the Norman unrestricted sales tax graph, the 2019 to 2025, some of the things that really stick out to me are that January of this year, reflecting December sales, was the highest revenue month we've had in the last 5 years. And then we're still tracking quite a bit ahead of where we were prior to 2020. So, we're below, but we're still like below comparing it to record highs in sales tax revenue over the last couple of years. And it looks like March of 2019 was our lowest year we've had in the last 5 years in that fiscal years. And that showed that we brought in less than $5 million, slightly less than $5 million that month.
And
then
that
our
was
biggest month we brought in,
pre-COVID.
right,
March of 19, nobody had heard of it yet.
right. And so that was our lowest on here. But then this December, or January reflecting December, we brought in almost $8 million. So, that's almost $3 million more monthly revenue than we were bringing in 5 years ago.
Pent up holiday demand, and it all
And I-
exploded
We're
right there.
Definitely seeing a little taper off of these record highs we've had, but it is interesting to compare it that way and how it's changed, and also that we've had 7 out of 10 months have been negative compared to highs from last year, but negative this fiscal year compared to last year. And the other part that was real noticeable too stood out was the city's comparison, sales tax comparison of other cities, and every single city is negative this month. And like OKC and Moore are almost 7% negative, and Lawton is over 7% negative. We're at negative 3.5, but it looks like everybody's getting.
I did send council the notice of the new Caterpillar dealership up on North Interstate Drive. We love it when we see a new retailer opening the doors in a segment of the market that is non-existent or underserved in Norman already. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. We love to see the diversity in the types of businesses opening in Norman.
And the state posting a negative 13.23%. In the last month, it was negative 12, the month before negative 17, the month before that negative 17, month before that negative 14.
That's probably due to the grocery sales tax.
Okay, so the state has had 1 month of sales tax growth compared to last year. So, interesting.
On the fact that a dollar 5 years ago was worth 78 cents today.
Right.
It really compounds it.
Yeah. Councilman Dan?
I would say, while these numbers aren't rosy, again, OML is working on a 5-year plan to get us as cities more reliable funding sources. And with that in mind, I don't know if now's the time to be kind of looking at areas as a city where we might, we were talking about this parking excise tax, that's something. But yeah, I'd like to do our part to get across to our legislators that we need to change things.
And all of our legislators have different backgrounds. That's where a picture is worth 1,000 words. And to look at the graphs and be able to demonstrate to them, yeah, you guys took an active approach to reduce grocery sales tax, the state's portion. You told us everybody else had their cash registers fixed. We hope they do. That was statewide. Is that connected to every single city's statewide reduction in sales tax revenue? Question mark.
Yeah.
There's a lot of homework left to do still, but we see what you see, and it's worth. I think that supports OML's 5-year plan to help us diversify our revenue stream.
I think on that same note, again, focusing, if we were able to even get additional revenue source for essential public safety services, police and fire, two of our two biggest expenses that are 24/7, that cover the entire city limits, including areas that have no commerce and no sales tax revenue. Areas of the city where residents don't shop in Norman either. So it's like there's nowhere out there for them to shop, and they may live closer to Shawnee than they do downtown Norman, or the UNP. So that alone would make a huge difference for cities if we were able to have some additional way to take care of the expense of public safety.
We will do some delving into what was a couple of legislative cycles ago, the proposal to allow for the creation of public safety districts. And there was a conversation, they deemed a component was unconstitutional the way it was presented. And there was supposed to be corrective action being taken. We'll find that, and it was on OML's radar too. We'll dig into that and bring you an update on what the status was. It would be voter approved. If the voters want to approve it, why on earth would we not provide the opportunity? And I would think the legislature would be in support of allowing the voters to decide how they wanted to finance those public safety costs.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments or questions about the monthly revenue and expenditure reports? Anything else, Kim? Comments from anybody?
Appreciate you.
Okay, well, thank you everybody very much. This meeting is adjourned.
We got clear direction.
You told me that we're not on camera.
I
Like you just heard.